High-definition news updated for Wednesday, October 21st, 2015. I'm Jeff Kaufman.
I believe we're out of time, the time necessary to mount a winning campaign for the nomination.
Vice President Biden ends the speculation he will not run for the Democratic presidential nomination. In the White House Rose Garden this morning, with his wife and President Obama by his side, Biden acknowledged that it was too late in the game for him to build a campaign organization and catch up with the two candidates who've been running full tilt for months and years, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Biden has been wrestling with the decision even as he and his family have mourned his son, Beau, who died of a brain tumor in May. He has long said he would not run if his family was not emotionally ready for the long, hard slog of a campaign. This morning, he said his family is up to the challenge, but in Biden's words, the window has closed. But he said although he won't be a candidate, he will speak out on issues and to remind Democrats that they should not only not run away from the Obama legacy, but that they should run on the president's record of taking the country from crisis to recovery. And in a not very subtle dig at Hillary Clinton for saying at the Democratic debate that she was proud that the Republicans were her enemies, Biden said it's time for Democrats and Republicans to stop seeing each other as the enemy.
I believe we have to end the divisive partisan politics that is ripping this country apart. And I think we can. It's mean-spirited, it's petty, and it's gone on for much too long. I don't believe, like some do, that it's naive to talk to Republicans. I don't think we should look at Republicans as our enemies. They are our opposition. They're not our enemies. And for the sake of the country, we have to work together.
The reality of the situation is that Biden has been polling far below Clinton and Sanders, though it's possible his numbers would have risen if he'd officially entered the race. But Biden also had to consider whether his late entry into the race would damage Democratic chances for a win next November. In the end, Biden decided this was not his year, and this was probably his last chance to run for an office he has tried to win twice before. Republicans in the House of Representatives are meeting behind closed doors right now, and they may be inching, half-inching, maybe millimetering closer to being able to elect a speaker to replace John Boehner. The man many Republicans have been pressuring to run for speaker has stopped saying he does not want the job and now says he'd take it, but only under certain conditions. First, Wisconsin Congressman and former vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan says he would run for Speaker if almost all House Republicans agree to support him. That's a tall order. The Freedom Caucus, the group of hardcore Tea Party conservatives that pressured Boehner into quitting and opposes all compromise with the White House, has its own candidate for Speaker, and he has not dropped out. Second, Ryan wants Republicans to agree to a change in the House rules that would make it harder to dump a Speaker. And finally,
I cannot and I will not give up my family time. I may not be on the road as often as previous speakers, but I pledge to try and make up for it with more time communicating our vision, our message. What I told members is, if you can agree to these requests, and if I can truly be a unifying figure, then I will gladly serve.
This is far from a done deal, very far, but it's closer than the Republicans have been so far. If you had a nickel for every day that the cable news channels led their newscast by saying, this could be the day that Vice President Biden decides if he's going to get into the race for the White House, well, you'd have a nickel for every day. They're saying it again today. But we have to admit, Joe Biden sounds more like a candidate every day. But every day he waits is another day that the frontrunner for the Democratic nomination, Hillary Clinton, stays the frontrunner. Over the past couple of days, Biden has put a little edge in his comments about Clinton. Nothing overt, nothing openly hostile, just reminders of how close he and President Obama are, about how he is the last guy in the room with the president, as Biden says, when there's a decision to be made. Last night at a Washington political dinner, Biden seemed to be criticizing Clinton for saying at the debate that she was proud that Republicans were among her enemies.
It is possible, it is necessary to end this notion that the enemy is the other party. End this notion that it's naive to think we can speak well of the other party and cooperate. What is naive is to think it's remotely possible to govern this country unless we can. That is what is naive. It's mostly important that everybody in this room understand the other team is not the enemy. If you treat it as the enemy, there is no way we can ever resolve the problems we have to, and you end up with the dysfunction that we're experiencing here in Washington.
For her part, Clinton says the reference to Republicans was mostly a joking one. Guess who dropped by the Kremlin last night for a chat with President Putin? Syrian President Bashar Assad, whose surprise trip to Moscow is his first outside Syria since the civil war there began in 2011. It's likely that this is not a case of, I happen to be in the neighborhood, Vladimir. Russia has been propping up Assad by sending warplanes to bomb the guerrillas trying to overthrow him, and Putin undoubtedly ordered Assad to Moscow to let him know what's going to happen next. The U.S. is on the opposite side of this fight. It supports the rebels fighting Assad. Yesterday, the U.S. and Russia hammered out an agreement that is supposed to keep American and Russian warplanes from being in the same place at the same time. By the way, yesterday Justin Trudeau had his first phone conversation with President Obama since being elected Prime Minister of Canada 2 days ago. Once the small talk was over, Trudeau told Obama that Canadian jet fighters would no longer participate in airstrikes in Syria and Iraq against the group that calls itself Islamic State. A major change this morning in the advice the American Cancer Society gives women about when to begin getting annual mammograms and how often to get them. Up till now, the recommendation for women who are of average risk for getting breast cancer has been that annual mammograms should begin at age 40. But now the Cancer Society says the right age to start is 45, and that after age 55, women should have a mammogram only every other year. Dr. Kevin Effinger of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center chaired the committee that came up with the new guidelines.
From 45 on, we felt that annual mammography gave us our best chance of both reducing premature mortality as well as balancing out with the potential harms associated with mammography.
Those risks are due to a mammogram being an X-ray. The Cancer Society's new recommendations also advise women to skip the 6-minute clinical exam in which a doctor feels for a lump. The new recommendations bring the American Cancer Society more in line with a federal panel that says women should be screened every other year beginning at age 50. And that panel is hugely influential with insurance providers. But the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists still says women should be screened beginning at age 40. Some women's health organizations object to the Cancer Society's new guidelines. For example, the Susan G. Komen organization is worried the new guidelines may lead some insurers to limit coverage for breast cancer screenings.
From the High Definition News Data Desk.
Every year, we humans make about 245 million tons of new plastic. That's 70 pounds for every man, woman, and child on planet Earth, all 7.1 billion of us. 70 pounds a year. Where does it all go? We've known part of the answer for some years now. A lot of it goes into the trash, which means it ends up in landfills, if we're lucky, and in that giant floating mass of plastic out in the middle of the Pacific. Now, researchers from UC Davis and a university in Indonesia have discovered where else plastic wastes end up. On your fork. The website Scientific Reports says scientists found that 25% of the fish they bought from markets in California had pieces of plastic in them. The figure was the same in Indonesia. The good news, if you can call it that, is that the scientists only found plastic debris in the fish's digestive tract, which typically is a part of the fish that Americans don't eat, but they do eat it in Indonesia and other countries. L.A. County has long required dogs to be spayed or neutered and to have a microchip implanted. Now the rule applies to cats, too. The Board of Supervisors approved the new cat regulations yesterday. The rule only applies in unincorporated areas of the county. The new cat regulations allow for exemptions for medical reasons and for show cats. A geophysicist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory is reporting she's conducted a study that shows a 99.9% probability that a magnitude 5 or greater earthquake will occur in the next 2.5 years along the same fault that caused last year's La Habra quake. That quake measured 5.1, and it caused a considerable amount of damage. Now, it's never a bad idea to have your emergency supplies kit and your water supplies checked and accessible, and your evacuation and emergency contact plans ready and rehearsed. But before you put on your hard hat and grab the kids and the dog and huddle under the dining room table for the next 2 years, we want to let you know that a Caltech seismologist says earthquake prediction is not as exact as science as the JPL study makes it sound. And the risk of paying too much attention to that study is that it scares people, and if the quake does not happen, people may not take earthquake preparedness seriously. But we thought you might want to know. Forget earthquake prediction, you probably could have predicted the announcement that LA's Department of Water and Power just made. LA residents, like people all across the state, have done such a good job of using less water during the drought that the DWP's revenues are down. So it's raising water rates. The average customer will end up paying another couple of dollars a month. No good deed goes unpunished. Here's some catch-up for your Wednesday breakfast. This is some of what might have got past you since yesterday. USC student body president says not much has changed on the Trojan campus in the 3 weeks since a student shouted a racial slur and threw a drink at her as she walked past the fraternity house. So Rini Sampath and some student organizations came up with a plan, which she presented last night to the USC Student Senate. Sampath, who is of Indian heritage, says other colleges like UCLA have instituted diversity training and incident reporting procedures, and she wants USC to do the same. Her proposal calls on USC to hire a vice president of diversity, to make diversity training mandatory for students and staff, and to set aside $100 million for scholarships and programs for underrepresented groups. USC says it will listen to Sampath's proposals, but that it has a reporting system in place and staff dedicated to responding to incidents of discrimination or harassment. But at several on-campus forums, USC students have told stories of being harassed and discriminated against on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, or sexual orientation. The student Sampath says harassed her has reportedly been tossed out of his fraternity. First, Ahmed Mohammed brought an electronic clock to his Texas high school, where a teacher thought it kind of looked like a bomb. Ahmed was handcuffed and hauled down to the police station, where the cops questioned him without his parents or an attorney present. When the story hit social media, a lot of people thought Ahmed had got a raw deal, that he was being picked on because of his name and his religion. He got an invitation to the White House from President Obama. He visited Monday night, along with a couple hundred other geeks of all ages who joined the Geek-in-Chief for astronomy night on the South Lawn. Ahmed got a presidential handshake and some encouragement. Yesterday, he and his family visited Capitol Hill, and afterward, Ahmed said that even though being handcuffed and treated like a criminal was not cool, in the end, things had worked out pretty well for him.
My name is Ahmed, and I live in Texas, and I got arrested last month in September. And I would like to say that I'm glad that this happened to me because I get to spread my word out to the people and tell them that it's not by the color of their skin or by their religion, but it's by their heart. And you always judge a person by their heart, not what they look like.
And just like an after-school special, all's well that ends well. Except that was not the end of the story. Last night, Ahmed's family announced that he's accepted an invitation from a foundation in Qatar to move there and have his college education completely paid for. The whole family's going, Mom, Dad, and his 2 sisters. They leave next week. A family friend told the Washington Post that although Ahmed is grateful for the support he's received from President Obama, Hillary Clinton, celebrities, and ordinary Americans, he was frustrated over the many conspiracy theories that have flown around the internet. The ones that claim Ahmed is not just a 14-year-old high school kid, that it was not just a clock, that it was all a setup. In the end, the kid who became famous because of a clock decided it was time to be someplace where he would not be an outsider, even if that place is half a world away. Ahmed's clock fit into a lunchbox. Now to the problems of a clock that's a lot bigger, and it's a big part of a nation's image. That's Big Ben, the ginormous clock that sits atop Westminster, where Parliament meets in London. Actually, officially, Big Ben is the name of the bell, not the clock. But ever since Westminster was built in 1858 to replace a previous Parliament building that had burned down, most everybody uses Big Ben to refer to the whole thing, clock, bell, and tower. It's the best-known symbol of Great Britain. Now London's Sunday Times reports that Big Ben is so broken down, there's a risk that the clock's hands might fall off. The Times says Big Ben's bearings and its pendulum are worn out, and the tower is suffering from serious metal erosion and its roof is cracked. Fixing everything will take about 4 months and costs millions of pounds. But for the British, the worst part is that while Big Ben is undergoing repair, its hands will stop and the bells will be silent. But British historian Andrew Blick says the country cannot allow Big Ben to deteriorate anymore.
Big Ben and the Elizabeth Tower, of which it's on the top of, is an iconic image of the UK. It's arguably the most famous iconic image of the UK, one of the most famous images anywhere in the world. It's part of the image of the country. I don't think there are many developing world countries that would allow an iconic status symbol on that scale to fall into disrepair.
There is no timetable yet for when Ben will get his makeover, but a government report says if they don't start in the next couple of years, it may be too late to save Big Ben. Finally, when President Obama took office in 2009, Usher sang at the inaugural celebration. Last night at the White House, the President and the First Lady returned the favor.
Happy birthday to you.
Usher turned 37 yesterday. The Obamas surprised him in the Blue Room with a cupcake, a candle, and a duet.
Happy birthday, dear Usher. Happy birthday to you.
Usher was at the White House to shoot an episode of the PBS series In Performance at the White House. Queen Latifah, Smokey Robinson, and cellist Esperanza Spalding also appear on the show, but they left the singing to the Obamas. And since a court ruled a month ago that Happy Birthday is in the public domain, neither PBS nor the taxpayers are on the hook for any fees. Now you know what we know. I'm Jeff Kaufman, High Definition News.